Welcome to part 4 of FPP pattern design in Adobe Illustrator. In this session, we'll go through of how to actually start creating your pattern that will be printed off. Let's get started. So in this case, we want to go over to our artboards and we're going to create another artboard. Now I like to go up and go into properties. I like to create this so that I know it's the size of a page. Go to collect letter, make sure you've got whether you want it to be landscape or vertical, depending on your pattern, and then move it to where you want it within the screen. If you hold down Alt while you drag it, that will create a copy. And you can continue to do this until you have a row of what we consider your pages for your pattern. I like to create a full row, and then I'll select all of the pages in that row, hold down Alt while you drag, and you can create a second row and a third row, and so on and so forth, depending on how many pages you think you will need. Exit that view, and now we're going to get started. Now, first things first, last session in part 3, we went through and we created all of our color palettes and our pattern codes for each one of those colors. This time we want to create a color guide. That's usually my first step. So let's focus on page 1. I go in and I select the rectangular grid tool. Create a full page grid. Now you can use your arrow keys up and down or side to side to determine how many columns and how many rows you need. I've got 12 colors, so I'm going to use 12 rows, and I've got 5 columns, so I can use the color code, and notes, as well as a area to paste in fabric swatches. So I want to double check while I've got that grid that I've got the right stroke, the right point number for what it is that I want. And then I'm going to go back into layers. Now when we're starting to do creating the actual printed pattern, I like to put that all on a different layer. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one print, and I'm going to drag that group up to print. This way I've got organization and separation between my pattern and then my printed pattern. The next part I do is select the grid and then go into Live Paint, make just like we did before. This will make it so that you can easily paste in those colors and those color guides. So go through just like we did before with your hotkey K, choose each different color code, and go down your different rows. Now sometimes if you're using between 10, 20, 30, 40 different colors, you may have multiple pages with multiple grids that you would do this on. For now it's just 12, so I'm trying to fit it all on one sheet. We'll also go in another series towards the end when we're trying to wrap up our pattern, where we'll go through and add in for each one of these colors and one of the blocks how much yardage that we would need of that particular color. That way your pattern buyer has one sheet they can print off, take to their fabric store, understand which colors that they need, and also how much of which color that they need. And that's it for creating our color guide. We'll revisit the color guide later. For now, let's start creating the pattern pieces. With the color guide created, now we start wanting to move our sections and our pattern pieces into our page artboards that we have available. So let's go in. Remember, we're going to take pieces of our reverse pattern and we're going to move those over to the pages, not our actual pattern that's in the correct view. So let's go ahead and select section A. Now remember, section A is going to be on the right side rather than the left side because this is a reverse order. I like to take selection A. I'm going to copy it and then move it to the print side. Again, we're keeping things organized and separate between what's print versus what's our original. Then I like to expand once I've copied it over and just take section A1. I'm going to move that up to one of my pages. Again, this is why we're going to use our letter size artboards, so we can understand what pieces are going to fit and if they're not going to fit. In this case, because it's a rectangle, I can just rotate that and then it will set on a page. Now, if you recall, when we had created our sections, it created that magenta outline all the way around our section. I'm going to go ahead and grab that of our piece. And then I've got a action, which is basically creating a 1/4 inch offset of that entire shape using that magenta outline. That's creating our seam allowance. So hit Shift F3, and that's going to ask you, yes, do you want a 1/4 inch seam allowance? I hit OK. It changes that to black and also a dotted line, so I've got seam allowance all the way around the pattern piece. We'll continue on. So next we're going to select our A2, drag that up. Obviously it's going to be too big. Even if I rotate it, it's too big for one page. So let's go ahead, let's continue as we were to add our seam allowance. I'm going to select that magenta outline, hit Shift F3. Yes, I want a 1/4 inch. It expands it, but it's still going to be too big for just one page. Right now, we're going to just try to get it on one artboard. Later on, we'll come in and we'll actually add the lines of how we're going to paste this across 2 pages. For now, what I want to go into the artboards. You can do Shift O, and that will take you into this edit screen. I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to delete the second artboard. Now make sure you do not have the Move Artwork with Artboard selected. If you do have that selected, it will also make changes to your pattern pieces. We just want to change the artboard. So yes, let's edit the artboards. I'm going to expand this artboard just so it's big enough to hold the pattern piece, and then I'm going to exit. Again, when we're on final edits, we'll come through and we're actually going to separate this into a part A and a part B when it's printed. But for now, we just want to make sure all of our pieces and all of our sections are moved onto the artboards. Let's continue with the rest of section A. Now, rather than adding seam allowance every single time, I'm just going to drag them up, make sure I've left room for seam allowance, and I'm going to drag up each of the pieces into the different artboards. You can rotate them to make them fit, or whatever it will take just to make sure that you've got room for seam allowance and we're putting as many pieces as we can within the page. Don't forget that you've got page margins as well, so you don't want to go all the way to the edge. In this case, I'm going to expand all of the pieces that we have so I can select all of the magenta outlines at once and do seam allowance at once. So go ahead, if you hit Control, plus you're selecting each of the outlines, that will select all of the outlines for all of the pieces that I've got. I can do Shift F3, and then I've added seam allowance all at once. Now you might notice some of my corners on my seam allowance look a little weird. Use your direct selection tool or your hotkey A, and you can come in and you can just click on those points and correct them. Sometimes your corners may be too long, sometimes they're too short, sometimes they're just crooked. Go ahead and select them and reframe them how it would be appropriate. While we still have section A expanded, this is a good opportunity to go into each piece and add a label so we know that what each piece corresponds to. Let's get started. Now I like to go through and just kind of highlight, make sure that I know which piece I've pasted where. So we've got A1 and A2. Grab your text tool and also increase your font. You've got to choose according to how big or small your piece is, what you want. Select your font that you're after, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to create A1 and A2. Now let's move on over to our other pieces, and I'm just going to create A3, A4, A5, and A6. I'll click on them so I remember which one is which, so that I'm not putting the wrong label on the wrong piece. So I've gone through, selected A3, A4. A5 is too small to actually put the same label in there, so we're going to set it to the side and we'll fix that in a minute. Let's continue labeling. Now get your selection tool or your hotkey V. We're going to select that A5 we know is too big. Go up to type, convert to point type. Now if you hold that corner down, if you hold shift down, now I can move it to the right size so it will fit within this piece, and then I'm going to continue. I like to drag the labels onto each piece so everything is contained. If I need to move that piece, the label will move with it. Oops, I've got two A7s. Let's go in and fix it. So select it, get my type tool, change that to A6, and now let's continue. Do this for each of your pieces within the pattern until you have all of your pieces on the page artboards to the side of your pattern.